Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. As you know, each week I do my best to find the best of the best. I scour the earth. You know, I spend so much time trying to find the guy or the girl that knows their topic unlike anybody else. This week is no exception. We actually landed in England today. So I have an awesome guy, Brett Putter. How are you?
Hey, very good. Thanks. Really looking forward to our show today.
Absolutely. We're going to have fun. And you actually are an author. So, fellow author, congratulations on two books, and we'll jump into those in a little bit. But you're actually CEO of the CultureGene. So, why don't you explain to the listeners and to me exactly what is the CultureGene?
Sure. So CultureGene is a company I founded 4 years ago now. And it was because prior to that, I'd run an executive search firm. And I was lucky enough to work with a couple of founders that really understood company culture. And I realized that the processes I ran with them during the searches were just fundamentally different, and the candidate interactions were different, the results of the interviews were different, and the actually impact that the candidates made in the companies were radically different. And this is where I started to think that culture might be the missing link. And so I started to research company culture and interviewed a bunch of people, spoke to companies, and realized that most companies felt that culture was important, but didn't know how to really make culture real. And I decided to make that my mission. And that's where we are today. CultureGene is a culture development platform. We help high growth companies, typically high growth companies, define, embed, and manage their culture.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think, I love culture as well. I think it's like ambiguous, right? It kind of, nobody really understands it. It's like, what is it? Do I have it one day? Do I lose it the next day? It's kind of one of those, to me at least, it's hard to define. So, Brett, how do you define culture from your side in the research that you've done?
So my favorite definition of culture is quite broad. It's basically the way we do things around here.
Okay.
And so that the reason why that I like that definition is because culture is in everything that you do, everything that the people in your company do. And whether you like it or not, you have a culture and you start developing a culture from day one. Initially, it may be by default and not terribly deliberate, but the best leaders start to make their culture deliberate and intentional, thereby making it less ambiguous and really making it more visible, conscious, and tangible to their people. So making your culture real. If you look at the great CEOs like Satya Nadella, who's turned around Microsoft, or Reed Hastings, who's building such a great business out of Netflix, or various others over the years, they all make culture very visible, very tangible, and very consciously active in the organization. And so that's what I help companies do.
So that's awesome. And I mean, I love that it's so simple. Okay. The way we do things around here. Now, I don't want to confuse it with the negative of that is that's just the way we do it around here. The way things always have been done, right? Those nasty words that, well, that's just how we do it around here. We're not changing now, right? So it's different than that, which I appreciate. I mean, so let me ask it this way: is culture intentional, or is it kind of the result of something? Is it something where we lead with, or is it something kind of that follows us? I was always curious about that.
Yeah, so in the beginning of most companies, it's not deliberate. Most leaders aren't thinking about it. They're just thinking about how to make their business into something real and survive. And so in those situations, culture happens by default, and culture develops as a function of our learning about what works and what doesn't work. The thing about culture is it's this random combination of good and bad behaviors, habits, norms, principles, beliefs, communication styles, processes, procedures, policies, etc., etc., etc. The point is, it's both good and bad.
Okay.
So if it's working and you're a smaller company, the good and bad don't matter that much because everybody's so close to one another and you're in one another's pockets that you can overcome that. But if you allow that to scale to 100 people or 200 people, the good and the bad get exponentially better and worse, but the bad comes back to haunt you. So if you don't make your company culture intentional, and you don't be deliberate about defining your values, your mission and vision, and then embedding those into your functions, processes, and your leadership team, and then managing the culture as if it was a function itself, then you end up in a situation where you allow what happens to happen. And that can become a very dangerous place to be, especially now that we've transitioned to remote work. In the office, we could kind of be lazy about it because the office would do the work for us of maintaining the structure, allowing information to be passed around, allowing for no real intentional culture development, but the best leaders did. And so now that we're in this remote environment, which will probably go to hybrid, it's a very dangerous place to be, to allow your culture to just run amok.
So you then, we have a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs that listen. So if they're looking kind of at their business from an out of body experience, so to speak, they're looking down on it and they're not in it, and they're saying, we don't have culture, or I'm not sure what kind of culture. If they haven't been exposed to culture, Brett, what do you suggest that people do to kind of get almost like a litmus test of what are we? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we not heading in the right direction? Do you have any feedback for somebody like that?
Yeah, most leaders have a sense about when their culture is going well, even if it's not defined. Most leaders have that gut instinct where they can tell things are going well, or they can tell actually things aren't going so well. But actually, there are a bunch of survey tools you can use nowadays to survey how engaged your people are, to survey how what the morale is like. You can survey the energy and how people are feeling on a weekly or a monthly or a quarterly basis. And that's one of the ways to really start to get a sense. It's not the whole thing, because surveying me at one moment in time doesn't tell me about your culture, but it gives me more insight into if you have the right survey questions, it gives me more insight into what's going well in your company, not going well in your company, which teams feel that there is strong feedback or weak feedback. There's a lot of trust and there's no trust. The leadership deals with us in a morally ethical way or not, or there is an environment of safety and psychological safety in your environment. So I would just it's very hard to put to tell in the wind. You get a sense that there's something maybe right or wrong, but actually if you ask your people through survey tools, you will find out pretty soon how things are going and
Wow.
what they want changed.
So, it's interesting because you talked about a gut instinct, and when I do my work with business owners as a business coach, there's times that people have a blind spot, where they say, oh my gosh, my company's awesome. I mean, we talk a lot about employee engagement. You use the word, so we'll, kind of jump into this Gallup poll. Now in the US, it might be a little bit different over there in England. So I'd love to hear your feedback. But, Gallup poll shows that approximately 2 out of 3 people, every day show up and they're disengaged in their actual job. So they're not an engaged person. They don't show up to improve themselves. They don't show up to improve the company, the team, the customer. They just are there existing, and some people are actually going backwards. So if somebody's listening and they say, oh my gosh, I hear this all the time. They say, my team's fine. I don't have, if I have 10 people on my team, that means that, 6 or 7 out of 10 are not engaged. And I hear people all the time, Brett, say, oh, that's not me. Oh, I have a great team. I got 10 people and they're just all engaged. I mean, and I'll buy it, I'll believe it, and I don't question people. Somewhere though, there's got to be the statistic makers, right, that aren't engaged. So if somebody thinks that their culture is going well, it might be a blind spot for them. And so you suggest these surveys. So I love that survey piece. Do you have any specific surveys that you recommend, or is it just like jumping on SurveyMonkey and asking questions? Kind of walk us through that if you wouldn't mind.
So there are companies that do this very well. So companies like Peakon, Culture Amp, um, 15-5. I think that's right, 15-5. Yeah, 15 minutes every 5. Anyway, 15-5. There are a bunch of companies that do this.
Okay.
You can actually go and do your own SurveyMonkey survey. The companies that do this on a enterprise level they're not cheap. So if you are looking at saving money at the moment, then jump onto SurveyMonkey or one of the other survey
Sure.
tools and
Sure.
build your own. The other thing to mention when you say that the CEO thinks their culture is going well is I often find either a gap or a chasm or a Grand Canyon sized gap between what the leader thinks the values of the company
Right.
are
Yep.
and what the employees know that the company's values are. And actually, as part of our process, we actually try and work out what this gap is. So what are our current values? And some of those will be negative. What are our aspirational values? And some of those, and all of those will be positive. And how far are we? What's the impediment? What's the gap between current values and aspirational values? And then when I do this, I don't invite leadership to participate in this. I do it with everybody else but the leadership team.
Sure.
And so I go to the leadership team and I say, so this is what you think it is, and this is what it really is. And actually, unless they are very stubborn and low EQ, they go, yeah, kind of, we get that. But how do we get to the aspirational side? How do we move it aspirationally?
And there's people listening right now, Brett, that are going, oh man, the light bulb just went on, right? Because they've been going along thinking, whether it's remotely or not, you know what, my remote people are fine. You know what, they don't need interaction. They got Zoom, they got Teams, they got whatever they need. They're fine. There are blind spots that we have as leaders. And so, I really appreciate those survey pieces. If we were wanting to survey our team and we wanted to try to do it internally, do you help with the questions? Do you provide feedback? Are you involved in that part of the process at all for you at CultureGene?
Yeah, so what we do at CultureGene is we will go and interview the entire senior leadership team and a group of people, non-leaders, so maybe middle management and not middle management, but non-leadership, and then we survey the entire company. And one of the questions, for example, that we will ask is, who in your company best represents the company culture and why, excluding leaders? So which person best represents the company culture and why? And you get clusters of people, you get really interesting understanding just from that one question of what people think the culture is and what's important to the company from their point of view.
Sure.
And we'll also ask questions like, if you could change one thing about the company, what would it be? And what would the impact of that be? So it really depends on where you are in your journey and what you want to understand. But if you want to run regularly monthly or quarterly surveys, we help build that. We've got a software tool that we've built that you can use that element of the software as part of our service.
Oh, wow. And that's, see, I think what I like about what you're saying is, I in my past life owned a business and had 22 people on my team. And, we had about $10 million in annual sales and life was good. Well, prior to my exposure to culture, you just kind of made the assumption that, sales drives the company or the customer drives the company or the manufacturer. There were things that were driving your company that you felt like weren't in your control. I feel like culture is actually something that you have some control over. And it really makes the difference between those engaged people and disengaged people, because who here likes to sit next to somebody that's not engaged? Who here likes to listen to the negative Nelly in the meeting? Who here likes to, here we go again? All that is just building up. And I think that a lot of times leaders just kind of let that go. And I'm trying to help people to be more aware. I love the fact that you talked about EQ, because the higher our emotional intelligence, and emotional quotient, the more likely we're going to be aware of what's going on our team. So
Yeah.
how does EQ fit into your world at CultureGene for you guys?
So what I found sort of during the development of the CultureGene process, I was interviewing leaders for my second book, Own Your Culture. And I was interviewing them to understand what they do so that we could build that into the CultureGene process, but also obviously interviewing them for the book. The fascinating statistic is I had to speak to 500 companies to get to be able to interview just over 50 leaders, and the reason for that is I had, I had layers of the onion questions about culture. So layer one is values, mission, vision. Layer two is how do you embed them? Layer three is what are you doing with your leadership team on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, and so on. And I would be told, I'd say I'm writing this book. Who knows people with a great culture? And I'd say, go and speak to Jackie. Jackie's got a great culture. And I'd ask Jackie about these layers of questions, and we would stop at layer 2 or 3 because Jackie would say, we don't do more than that. We do this, we do a bit of this and a bit of that.
Sure.
Whereas the companies that really invested heavily in culture, every single one of their leaders had a high EQ. Just had this thing. They knew emotionally that what was so important for their people.
Yeah.
Often they looked at their employees as their customers. They had to service this customer of theirs, make their job as easy as possible, and create the environment for them to thrive and grow and develop. And that would then in turn have the knock-on effect to the customer, the actual customer of the company.
Well, I tell you, we use EQ, we use assessments, for EQ to tell where people are at in their life. And, I love the fact that EQ actually is one that you can improve, and from the research, it shows the higher your EQ, the more money that you make. It's a pretty safe parallel. What you're saying though, is the higher the EQ, the more cognizant they are of culture. Does that mean then, Brett,
Yeah.
that also that the culture is good, or it just means they're aware of it and they know they have to address it? Is it always a good culture, in that situation?
Yeah. So there's no, the only time culture is relevant from a good perspective is if I would join your company or not. Is it good for me or bad for me?
Yeah.
But essentially, culture can only be strong or weak, functional or dysfunctional. So the leaders with high EQs were very aware, but may not have known what to do about culture. So they tried a couple of things maybe, and they'd done some stuff. But the leaders that I interviewed in depth for the book had invested heavily, in some cases spent 50% of their time thinking about company culture and how it impacted the business.
Wow.
So those leaders really over-indexed on high EQ for me.
So that brings up a question, because I know there's a bunch of high D people, drivers that are listening that are going, you want me to spend 50% of my time on culture? I before you shut down as you're listening, before you say there's no way in the world I can do that. Okay, Brett, fill us in on the reverse, because if there's not an ROI on this, if I don't get a return on that investment, if there's not a reason to do it, I mean, it's one thing if how I picture culture is everyone sitting around the campfire, singing Kumbaya with a guitar, right? That's probably, you've heard that 100 times, but that's what I think the typical entrepreneur thinks. And I'm like, I don't have time for that, Brett. I gotta sell something. I gotta all these things. So in this research that you did you correlate a healthy culture with a healthy bottom line?
Yeah, a strong culture won't guarantee you success.
Okay.
But it gives you a better chance of success than if you have a weak culture. And if you look at the companies that have scaled to global significance and prominence over the last 10 or 15 years, you can literally, not a single one of these companies has not invested heavily in their cultures. Google, Facebook, Airbnb, Amazon, much older than that. But these companies, these Stripe, many companies, HubSpot, there is, you can, their culture is not only defined, it's understood, it's embedded, people work on it. I think Facebook have lost the plot a little bit, to be fair. And Google, to a degree, their culture's moved on as well. But one of the reasons for their success and the ability to scale at the speed that they scale was because they had a strong functional culture in place.
Okay.
Most leaders, if you ask most leaders, what's your biggest regret in business? Most of them, in that maybe top three, will say, I hired the wrong person.
Sure.
And the reason they hired many wrong people is because they don't get hiring right. They don't hire against the values fit of the company, because they don't think their culture and values fit are important. So, or as important as they should think it is. So that's the first element. If you were to run through a leader who's been leading businesses for 20 years and say to them, how many bad hires have you made and how much has that cost you?
Sure.
And if I say to you, if you build the right culture and you build the right processes, you will make at least half fewer mistakes. That return on investment is already significant.
Absolutely. Okay. So was that pretty typical for you to find that, that there was bad hires was pretty significant? Like you said, it was in the top 3 of called business mistakes, whatever, however you label that. But I mean, that is an expensive, potential game changer if you hire the wrong person, even if it's the right person, but the wrong seat in the bus, right? I mean, that can also become an issue there. So you brought something up. I want to ask you a question. I mean, how would somebody, let's just take a person that has, I don't know, 25 people on their team, and they're cruising along and they think life is good and they own this business but they are listening to this and something you said stuck in their craw, and it said, you asked about investing in culture. So what tips or suggestions do you have for someone listening on how would I invest in my culture? What are some things that I, as a business owner, could do to, understand my culture and, quite frankly, improve it if I see that it's lacking?
So if you've done nothing with your culture, let's say you're starting with a blank slate, the first thing I recommend is that you define the values that are important to you.
Okay.
And I then recommend that you don't do it as the leader, you do it as a team. So you include the rest of the organization. So you then get buy-in immediately. You've got people who feel that they've got skin in the game. And then think about your mission and vision. And I think this can come from that leader. The leader should have a vision that they're working towards. And the mission is what you do to complete the vision. So you've got values, mission, and vision. And then think about, okay, what do these values mean? The mistakes that most leaders make is they define the values, and in the old days, they would stick them up on the wall and nothing would change.
Yep.
And the way you get around that and you get through that is you then work with your team to define the behaviors associated with each one of those values. So what does teamwork mean to us? Or what does transparency mean to us? What does make a difference mean to us? And we define what that means. And we also look at what you shouldn't do. So you can have both, this is the positive element, how we should behave, but also this is what we do not accept. And if you define what's not acceptable, then people understand that. They start to take on board the difference between the two because you're making it clear for them.
Sure.
What's important. And if you then go to the stage of saying, okay, now we're going to start to incentivize these behaviors. So we're going to reward or recognize these behaviors. We're going to measure or pay attention to these behaviors. We're going to train, mentor, and educate for these behaviors. The leadership team are going to start using a framework for leadership around these behaviors. That's when you start to go deeper and deeper into the onion. But the first point of call for most businesses is the definition of the values, because the values are the DNA of the business. They are relatively consistent and constant over time. They can help guide decision-making, and they're in each and every one of us in the company. It's the reason why people joined you in the first place. They joined you because of the implicit agreement that you made with them, saying, we will work this way because this is how we work. And I can see that you would want to join that type of work way.
Well, and that's so interesting because, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, whether it's for clients, for my own business, whatever, and I think that so often, and even now in working with clients, I'm working with people to build their resume, for instance, and it's crazy because what is the vast majority of the words on a resume are the tasks that I've done or the tasks that I can do, right? It's what I can do. There's very little wording that talks about how I can do it. And, I really appreciate that, Brett, from your perspective, because, I think of it, I think of how many companies have this big, like you said, the mission statement on the wall. And number one, if it's like really long, I love, like Nike's is 3 words, I mean, for me on mine, on positive polarity, mine are 3 words. I said business growth manifested. That was the extent of, because number one, if it was more words, I couldn't remember them. And then if I can't remember them, how am I going to possibly live by them? Right. So I think it's so funny when I go to a company and there's like a whole wall. It's like, 4 or 5 sentences. And I'm like, so who knows what this is, and that's just, that's Harry. He just, he thinks that's how we should live. And the statistics are really sad to say that if you have a mission statement, but you don't live by it, the engagement for employee engagement, it just tanks. So I think that there's a real spot of wisdom there, Brett, where, what, if you're listening and you want to start your culture, it's really simple to try and just create your, define your values, like you said. But I think the problem is that it takes a lot of time. I mean, it's not like you just sit down and put a 15-minute, calendar piece on your calendar and block out 15 minutes and bam, there's your values are laid out. I mean, this takes time. So are you involved in that process with people, Brett, when they say, yes, I need to understand my values? How do you fit into that?
Yeah. So what I do is having built the software replicates my process. So what we do is we'll sit down and say, okay, let's get a team of people together from your company, and I need them for 2 90-minute workshops. So the first workshop is to explore the culture, the current values and the aspirational values, and the impediments to success within the company. And then the second workshop is really to take these apart and just understand them a little bit more. And those 2 workshops, sort of 3 hours over the course of a couple of weeks, will get us to the fundamental values. And then once we've done that, we do another workshop to get to the expected behaviors, which is another 90-minute workshop.
Sure.
So to get from nothing to values clearly defined and expected behaviors clearly defined is about 4.5 hours of work.
Okay.
For a team. So it doesn't always happen that quickly with companies who do it themselves, because there's a lot more, discussion, and the system I use really narrows things down very quickly and allows people. There's never the loudest voice in the room because it's mine.
Right.
And I control the sort of communication and the flow of communication, and I pick up if there are people who are not that chatty typically, or not that outgoing, and I'll ask them questions. So the way to bring this to surface for companies typically is, whiteboarding with post-it notes and thinking about it, and then trying to narrow it down and thinking about what animal we could be, or what behaviors are acceptable, and then narrowing it down. And however you do it, it can take time, but it's a tremendously good investment in your company, because you are investing in your people and giving them a framework by which they should live. And you're also investing in your company by giving yourself a framework by which you should hire people.
Sure.
And that's significantly worth the investment of time.
So I want to flip it around for a second, because we've been talking about the team. How does the culture actually influence a customer? because I look at things like when I wrote my book, Growing on Purpose, I made a connection between a strong team equals a strong customer experience. I mean, there's, found some research and we were able to make that connection. So, it is, walk me through what you've noticed, because I got to believe a strong culture for your, what you're talking about will then transcend over into a strong customer experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, in most cases it does. Actually, in all cases it will. I would have thought. I can't think of one where it hasn't, but I've got two really good examples for
Yeah.
you. In the UK, there's a company called Ryanair, and they're a low cost airline to tremendous growth. Uh, One of the most successful airlines in Europe, if not the most successful airline. You have exactly the same company in the US, Southwest Airlines.
Okay.
And when I get on a plane or when I buy a ticket, I will deliberately pay more money to not fly on Ryanair
Hmm.
because the customer service is terrible.
Okay.
So I will pay more money to fly BA just to avoid going with Ryanair.
Sure.
But I've loved flying with Southwest. Every time I've been to the States and I've had the pleasure of being on a Southwest airline, even
Yep.
if one of them isn't singing and dancing, just the respect, the people, that love all of that great energy and vibe that you get from Southwest. And that's just the perfect example.
Right.
To be fair, I would say that Ryanair have quite a strong culture, but it's a strong culture that keeps me away.
Interesting.
If you don't fit in with the way they work, which is bring your own pencil, then you shouldn't work there.
Yeah. If you need to sit, right, during that, standing is okay, right? As soon as you need a seat, then it's extra. Well,
If you got to,
and I think
space,
that, yeah, I mean, we had Midwest Express Air, which was, I'm from the Midwest in the US. So, we had Midwest Express, which was actually owned by Kimberly-Clark, which was a large paper manufacturer. And they were flying their own people around the country. And they're like, why don't we just like turn this into a for-profit business and fill some seats, So they had 2 across leather seating throughout the whole thing. This was pre 9/11. And they had, you would get served on china and you'd get champagne. And, about 20 minutes before landing, you'd be sitting there just, enjoying everything as much as you can in a little airplane. All of a sudden you get a whiff of chocolate chip cookies, and they were baking on the plane, chocolate chip cookies. So like 15 minutes prior to landing, he's walking around handing out these, like soft, right out of the oven, like, oh my gosh, right? And that became their kind of, they loved to do that. I mean, it was, you could see they loved, what they were doing. So, if your culture, if I look at it like a fresh eyes audit, an outsider comes in and looks at the company, because again, a lot of times business owners have blind spots. And if your customers aren't happy, it's probably safe to trace it back to the team. And I think that we as consumers also, we judge companies by how good or bad the experience is. We have in the US the DMV, which is the Department of Motor Vehicle, where you have to get your license, you have to get your renewals, all that for your automobile. And there's very few people that wake up going, yes, I get to go to the DMV today. I mean, it's just like, wow, long lines, a lot of numbers. The people sometimes that work there tend to struggle to smile because they're doing the same thing day in and day out. I always ask people, is your company more like, Midwest Express, or is it more like the DMV? And again, depending on their EQ, Brett, that's where you kind of tend to see, somebody's either starting to justify or not. So if you're talking to somebody and they are in that justification mode, they're defending their position. I don't know about you, but I feel like that's not really a workable solution. If somebody's defending their lack of culture, where do you go from there?
Away.
Away. That's perfect. Exactly. Right. What can you do? I mean, you
Yeah,
can't.
I'm not, life's too short. I work with my clients for a year. And so I need to know I'm going to like you. And I know that I need to know we're going to see eye to eye. And I need to
Sure.
know that when I come up with an initiative, if it's not going to work at your company because you understand your company better, we are going to sit down and work it out. And we're going to say, actually, we have to tweak it for this, or we have to adapt it for that. And also, if I ask you to change your communication style and you can do that, then there's a reason for it. Or if I ask you to change your leadership team meetings structure, there's a reason for it. So, that's if you don't get culture in the first place, you're going to tell me where I should get off the plane in a hurry if I'm starting to implement that or
Sure.
try to implement. So yeah, no, I just say, good luck when
Yeah.
the pain ultimately hits at some stage. So, you know, I do say whenever if you want to talk about your company culture, then come, I'm happy to chat about it.
Sure. That's awesome. And I think any 12-step program for anything, the first thing is to admit that you have a problem. I'm not saying you have to admit you have a problem as much as you have to be real and open and vulnerable and take a hard look at the company. And if you see things that you're struggling with and you don't know how to fix them, that's why people like Brett are here, to be able to help you with that, come alongside you and help. So, I appreciate that piece. One thing that I saw on your website that I wanted to ask you about was, you talked about having culture as an asset. So how do we turn that into an asset? Because again, sometimes people look at assets and liabilities on a P&L. They look at, it as either a good or a bad. I want to know, let me ask it this way. From your experience, give us a real world experience, give us some real world examples on, companies that you've worked with. Name them, don't name them, that's up to you. But, what did you see as they went through this? I'd love to kind of walk through, start to finish in a, like, what does this look like, and how did they, turn a bad culture good, or how did they turn a good culture even better? I don't know if you have any that come to mind for you.
Sure. I've got a client now in the they do operations and maintenance for solar farms in
Mm,
the UK. So they literally do everything from fix the panel when it breaks to mow the grass around the panels
gotcha. Okay.
and everything. Um, and so when the CEO of this company is amazing. Really, she'd already defined the values with the company, but then had worked really hard on the culture, but in an ad hoc way, knowing that it was important, but not really knowing what to do. And so I started working with them, and one of the things we did once we defined the behaviors and the mission and vision is the company is made up of different types of people. Frankly, you've got the technically brilliant people. You've got the electricians. You've got the people on the ground. You've got the people who are mowing the lawn, the green team, the monitoring team, young, old, and everything in between.
Sure.
And so about 70% of the team didn't get culture. They just didn't understand why. What is this thing? And various things we tried didn't really land. And then what we did is we said, okay, think about person X. Person X is that person who you've worked with in the past who just didn't fit in either this company or a previous company that you've worked in. Think about how they made you feel. Think about how they behaved. Think about what they did and the impact it had on the company and on you. And now think about who you are and what you stand for. And once we gave them the juxtaposition, they went, okay, we get it now. We get that we want to continue to hire people like us and avoid people X, the person X type people. And then what we did is we created an onboarding process for them where their values were embedded into every single step. And they were doing a lot of hiring at this stage. They doubled in the last 8 months, 9 months,
Wow.
the size of the team, going
Sure.
from 70 to 100 140, 135 at the moment.
Wow.
And so we changed the onboarding process, and then we changed the interview process. Because they already had done a lot of interviews, there are a lot of people coming on board. And the new joiners were like, wow, we cannot believe that this company, because we've come from the competition, we can't believe that this company operates like this. We
Sure.
can't believe that they even think about our well-being. One of their values is safety first. And it's not just safety first as in the words, they really demonstrate it all day, every day. And their strap line is everybody safe every day. And they were just blown away. And you can see in the last 6 months now, there's been a little bit of turnover, which is not, some people, hide for the wrong reasons or join for
Sure.
the wrong reasons.
Sure.
But turnover of people has plummeted. And actually, we're getting candidates leaving the interview process earlier now, because you can self-select in to the process and the culture, or self-select out of the process and the culture. So that's been very, very successful.
Wow. So that's interesting when you think about that. So I ask a question about culture, and it ends up on onboarding and interviewing. So you really don't know. I think that's the interesting thing about culture, is it does cover so many different pieces and chunks of your business. And again, you're great. If you're listening, you're great at what you do, whatever it is, build a widget, sell a widget, service a widget, whatever it is, you're great at what you do. These guys, that Brett's talking about, were great at maintaining this property, maintaining this product. They were great at that. You'd think that that would be enough to make a company successful, just being great at what you do. It's really important, but as Brett's sharing and as we're unpacking this, it's really the culture, because again, I look at it I'm a human being, and if I don't like showing up every day because I can't get along with somebody, or it's a sour culture, or I regret going to work, then why am I here? I mean, I got to go find somebody else, to work somewhere else to work. Now, maybe I'm the bad apple, and that's fine. I mean, there's obviously, Brett just said, they reduced the interview process because we can pick that out sooner or later. And I know that I've been in interviews where the qualifications really fit of a human being, the qualifications fit the job, but the personality, their style, that didn't fit the company culture. And so I've seen people successfully, not hire. And then I've seen people hire and it just trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. So are you helping at that hiring level, Brett, to kind of, help people at that juncture where, the culture kind of jumps in?
Yeah, so what we do is we take the values, we define the expected behaviors, and then we define the interview questions to evaluate for the values against the expected behaviors. So let me give you an example. If I ask, Dave, what does teamwork mean to you? And what does teamwork mean to your audience? A bunch of people may say, it's a group of people working together for a common goal in a period of time, communicating effectively. And there's no right or wrong answer here. But in my company, I may say that teamwork means the team always comes first. And actually, if we both get the same set of stimuli, we may end up making different decisions, because I just look at that word teamwork differently to the way you do, because it's open to interpretation. So what we do is we define the behaviors, and then we create interview questions against them. So if it's my company, if the value is teamwork, if the expected behavior is the team always comes first, the interview question is, when last did you take one for the team and why? And this is a very hard question to slide through, because I'm asking for a specific time, a specific action, a specific behavior, and why. And so we build this database of interview questions, and I train the team on how to interview, because I've got 16 years and 4,000 or 5,000 interviews under my belt. So I train the team on how to really ensure that the people coming through are the right match for the values of the company.
Sure. Wow. So ask that again, that question, because that's like really, that's a tough one. Name a time that you took one for the team.
and why.
and why.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, so you must get a lot of blank stares because that must be like, number one, no one's ever asked me that in those terms. Number two, I got to really rack my brain. I
Really
mean,
think, yeah.
I prepared for, if I was, if I'm intelligent or smart or whatever, I've prepared for this interview. I probably haven't prepared for that question.
You can't prepare for that question.
Right.
Because so what we do is we ask each candidate exactly the same question. Zzz. But then there are another 9 levels of questioning based on that answer. So if somebody gives me an answer, I will then have, depending on how they've answered, I will ask them, what was the impact of that? How did your team feel? Did you inform your team that it happened? Why did you inform your team that that happened? Does the leader know that you are playing that role? And do they sometimes, how do they deal with that? Are they more intense with you so that information I'd really go deep.
Sure.
Why?
Yep.
Because, and then I can evaluate your answers for vividness and believability. And now I'm not evaluating you on gut instinct.
Sure. Wow, that's great. So, and I did a podcast recently with somebody that taught me, if you're not asking 5 whys, you're not digging down deep enough. So my visual that I think of is an iceberg, because there's that little chunk above the water and the vast majority of that iceberg is underneath the water.
Yeah.
Whether I'm in sales or wherever I am, I'm trying to get to that piece underneath. So if the question gets asked, name a time that you took one for the team and why, and I say blah, 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 and this is why. If you go, oh, great, thanks for sharing, and go on to the next question, from what you're saying, and from the 5 whys side, we didn't dig deep enough. We kind of are above the water, but we really didn't understand anything as to the real impact that it had, the motivation behind it, some of the deeper things that really determine the success of that candidate. Is that correct?
That's correct. Once you get it, I find it quite hard to get down to 5 whys, but even if I get down to 4 whys,
sure, yep,
the context and the underlying rationale and their emotional state often has become very clear to me.
That's awesome.
And because I'm asking 3 or 4 or 5 candidates exactly the same question, I can score them out of 10.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a really powerful thing.
That's awesome. And yeah, I think the number of whys is probably less important than the thought process that don't let that go, without digging deeper. I mean, so often we're in a mile wide and an inch deep, right? We want to cover so much in these interviews, or we want to make, we want to understand that person as best that we can, but it's only like an inch deep. And it's interesting to understand, why did you take it for the team? And, because they say, well, I'm just a team player. I mean, that could be an easy way to just end right there, but it's like, well, tell me more about that. Why are you a team player? Whatever the questions are that you create along the way. So
if somebody says, I'm just a team player, I'd say, no, you clearly are, but take me through your rationale. What was your thinking around this? And that's how you get around a sort of what I would describe in that situation as a weak answer.
Sure. And I gotta say, Brett, I'm guessing that most people haven't thought of it, so they really don't have like a quick answer. Like if somebody's still using the "what's one of your weaknesses" question in an interview, I always laugh when I used to talk about the weaknesses of somebody. I care too much, I work too much, I mean, it was always something like that, right? And it was never like, oh my gosh, I suck at time management or whatever. If I'm in sales, I can't close a sale for anything, whatever it was. In this case here, you're kind of forcing the raw answer. And if it takes you a while, I mean, that's where I think the skill comes in of the actual interviewer, because this question may take 5, 10, 15 seconds of thought and silence before that actually happens. And I know in the soft skills training that we do, when you ask a question, just be quiet and allow the person to process and come up with an answer. So that's got to be kind of awkward though, because they're sitting there and you want to rescue them, right? But yet this is like the spot where they're really their true, self is coming through. So does it usually end in success, or have you had some train wrecks?
And no, there are, because people are not trained for this. And if you haven't done this, if you haven't taken one for the team and you try and make it up, or what you've done really wasn't, then it is a train wreck. But that's fine, because then we know you shouldn't be working in this company.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. It's a way of, the other way of interviewing is to say, yes, we kind of like you, and it feels like we like you, and it feels like we could have a beer with you. So let's just hold hands and work together, which is
Right.
nonsense.
Yeah.
It's absolute rubbish. But on your question, tell me about your weaknesses. If we want to sort of like, if we've done 3 hours of interviews and there's a fourth interview to do, and it's a little bit, you can see everybody's flailing, then what we'll do on the team is we'll say, we'll ask one of the candidates to come up with an imaginary weakness. So make up a weakness for us and tell us about this weakness that you have. and all of a sudden you can see a click, 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 and they actually go through their weaknesses, and then they go up one level. Sure. And they try and twist it, and it's just a good way of throwing people off, because they are expecting the weakness question.
Yeah, that's funny.
And refreshing the team as well.
Yeah, and I use DISC a lot, the personality profile, and we sell those and work with people on those. And there's one page that says your areas for improvement. Everything else is, if you want to call it that, positive, this is not so positive, whatever, however you want to look at it. This is kind of the one page where they look at your potential opportunities to get better at something. And so, I always encourage people to bring your assessment into an interview, because I can tell you, Brett, whatever you want to hear, about my weakness. I could say it's time management. I could say it's delegation. I could say it's whatever. And you kind of have to, unless you dig down deep and start to really understand the person, it's pretty easy in an interview for surface level questions to kind of just skate through, right? Mm. I love being that, excuse me, if somebody asks me and I'm like, well, hey, rather than me tell you, let me tell you what my personality assessment says. Page 19 shows this right here. And you know what? This is really accurate. And I do struggle with this. I think third-party validation in some of these types of situations are really valuable. As we start to come in for a landing, I want to kind of go back to your 15-5, or was it Pecan? Was that
Pecan, Culture Amp, 15-5, Office Vibe. Those are four companies you can have a look at.
Okay, so you were just kind of like Office Vibe. That sounds like a fun one. So whatever that is, you just kind of Google that, and then it helps you with that survey from a starting perspective. Yeah, because I think that's really an important starting point, because it's kind of like, if you don't think you have a foundational problem, then it's probably not as likely for you to do the work. And so then if you're like, I'm fine, everything's fine, and you go back to the way that nothing ever started. I mean, we never really looked at our culture other than from a 30,000 foot level. And again, everything looks great from way up there. So that's a great place to start. So excuse me. Again, as we come in for a landing today, I want to ask you a question. What would be, Brett Putter's tip of the week for anybody listening?
My tip of the week is to think of culture as a function in your business. Even if essentially culture is as important as sales, marketing, engineering, customer success. And yes, it's a black box at the moment, but if you, in the next year or two, whatever amount of time it is, take to understand company culture, it'll be a tremendous asset for your business. So to treat it like a function, and as a leader, I would highly recommend people start reading up about it, learning about it, and understanding it.
Wow, that's really awesome. I mean, I would have never have thought, you have the sales bucket, the marketing bucket, the operations, whatever your buckets are, and to have a special bucket just called culture really does make you look at it as a serious component of your business.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go through very long if you're a large company, you wouldn't go very long without creating a P&L. Why would you go very long without inspecting your culture? And quite frankly, I think the answer is because a lot of people don't see that it's that important. So hopefully today we kind of unpack that for people, help them understand the cost of it, help them understand some simple ways to get started. One last question for you, Brett. What's one thing that most people listening wouldn't know about you that you feel comfortable sharing?
Um, I my my biggest weakness is criticism.
Okay.
And so I married somebody who's very good at criticism.
Uh-oh. Hope they're
No,
not
but
listening.
no, so one of the things I try and do is try and take on this idea of a growth mindset,
Okay.
and you can get better at anything you put your mind towards getting better at. And so I take criticism, uh, well, I've taken criticism in worse ways. I'm getting better at it, but it's literally something I'm always learning to be better at, because I have an immediate reaction to it, which is not positive in a lot of cases. So, marrying somebody who can be pretty critical at the right times. When I read my second book, I asked her to read the first version, and all she said to me is, "Do you really want me to tell you what I think about this book?" And I said,
Ouch.
no, it's
Yeah,
all good.
right. Oh my
All good.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks for being vulnerable. That's awesome. I mean, it is part of why we own our own companies, is to call our own shots and to be able to, do things the way that we want. So,
Yeah.
it's hard. I know as a business coach, I come alongside entrepreneurs all the time, and I have to tread lightly at times as to how deep you want to go. And that's one of the first questions that I ask people when we're coaching is, how depending on who it is, the wording is, how deep do you want to get this? How serious do you want? I mean, if there's a flaw I see, what do you want me to do with that? Because to your point, if you struggle with criticism, it would be really difficult to potentially take criticism from an outsider. I mean, and you're paying somebody to do it. That's even like, holy cow, that's even worse. I want a coach to tell me all the great things about my golf swing, not the bad things about it. Right. And I get it. That's, so you kind of got to find that balance. So I appreciate that. Hey, Brett, if somebody's listening and they are intrigued by what we talked about and they want to learn more about CultureGene, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So you can reach out to me through my website, which is www.culturegene.ai. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. And if people just want to reach out to me, I'd spend a lot of time just talking about culture with people. My email is Brett, BRETT, @culturegene.ai. Please hit me up. I love talking about it.
Awesome. And just don't get confused. His real name is Breton. So if you see Breton on LinkedIn, that's the same guy, but he told me early on that only his mother calls him that. So I made sure I didn't call him that, because I didn't want him the hair to stand up on the back of his neck like he did something wrong. So awesome, Brett. This has been so helpful. I took a ton of notes. I appreciate all your vulnerability and being open and sharing this with us. And again, if you're listening, do yourself a favor. It's entirely possible that your company culture could use a tune-up. It could use some help. Maybe it doesn't even exist. I mean, everybody's got culture, right? There is a culture. But if you're not aware of what it is, or you think that it is okay, then I challenge you to get a second opinion, from somebody like Brett, and just get some feedback to see where that is. if you're seeing high turnover, if you're seeing disengaged employees, if you're seeing a lot of people sick, calling in sick, and just you're not seeing the flow, and you're not seeing the positivity coming out of your company, and your customers aren't seeing it either, then it's a problem, and it's something that you can address and you can fix. And that's why CultureGene is here, to be able to fix and to help come alongside you and work on your culture. So thanks so much, Brett, for hanging out with us. And if I'm ever in England, which, it just doesn't seem like we'll ever fly again, but if we ever do, I'd love to find you and hang out with you. So thank you
Yeah,
so
sure.
much.
Love to, Dave. Thanks very much for your time. Had a really great session today.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye-bye.